The night was cold. Under the dim glow of a parking lot lamp, a little girl sat barefoot on the concrete, hugging a worn-out teddy bear. She was shivering, hungry, her tiny lips pale from the night air. A tall man in a sharp suit stopped in his tracks. Adrian Carter, the young, handsome millionaire CEO, stared in disbelief. "Why is a child alone out here at midnight?" He took a careful step forward, unaware that what he was about to hear would change both of their lives forever. The wind cut across the nearly empty parking lot that night, carrying with it the smell of rain on asphalt and the distant hum of city traffic. Adrian Carter, the 32-year-old millionaire CEO known for his unshakable composure in boardrooms, slowed his steps as he headed for his sleek black car after another long day of back-to-back meetings, his mind still full of numbers and deadlines. But then something pulled his gaze toward the far corner of the lot beneath a flickering street lamp, and in that moment, the world he knew shrank to a single heartbreaking image. A tiny barefoot girl, no more than 6 years old, sitting on the cold concrete with her knees drawn to her chest, clutching a frayed brown teddy bear, as if it were her only anchor in the world, her hair tangled by the wind, her thin cotton dress wrinkled and far too light for the chilly evening, her small shoulders trembling from the cold. Adrian stopped, his breath catching in his throat, a strange ache rising in his chest, because for all his wealth and power he had never seen a sight that made him feel so helpless. He glanced around instinctively, half expecting to see a frantic parent rushing back for her, but the lot was empty except for the distant rows of cars and the soft hum of the city's nightlife. Drawing a slow breath, he stepped closer, his expensive leather shoes crunching softly against the gravel, trying not to startle the child, his voice gentler than he had used in years as he crouched to her level and said almost in a whisper, "Sweetheart, why are you out here all alone?" The girl flinched at the sound of a stranger's voice, hugging the teddy bear tighter to her chest, her big brown eyes glistening in the lamplight as she lifted them toward him, and in that fragile, hesitant glance, Adrian saw not only fear, but also a deep weariness that no child her age should ever know. Her lips trembled before she finally spoke in a thin, hoarse whisper that carried both shame and hunger. My stepdaddy told me to stay here. I've been here since last night. I'm so hungry." Adrian's heart lurched violently, as though struck by an unseen blow, his sharp CEO facade crumbling at once, and he found himself leaning in, almost unable to believe what he had heard as he asked softly, "He left you here? All night?" The girl nodded, lowering her gaze, her voice barely audible as she explained, "I was so hungry. I didn't know the boiled meat in the kitchen was for his dog. I only ate a little piece. He yelled at me. He said I didn't deserve to be in his house. He told me to get out. And not to come back." Adrian felt an unfamiliar burn rise behind his eyes, and for the first time in years the man who could make entire industries tremble felt utterly powerless in the face of a child's pain. For a moment he couldn't speak, afraid that if he did his voice might break, then finally he asked in a gentler tone, Where is your real father, sweetheart?" The girl's eyes brimmed over with tears as she clutched her teddy bear tighter and whispered, "Mommy told me. My real daddy died in an accident. She said he's in heaven now." Something inside Adrian clenched painfully at those words, and though he didn't yet understand why, the ache in his chest deepened as he quietly removed his tailored coat and draped it over her frail shoulders, the heavy wool almost swallowing her tiny frame, and as he tucked the collar gently beneath her chin he said, his voice hushed but steady, "No child should have to sit out in the cold like this. Come with me, I'll get you something warm to eat." The girl hesitated, glancing down at her bare feet as if afraid to take a step, then slowly reached out a small, trembling hand, which Adrian took in his much larger one, feeling how cold and fragile. It was as he helped her stand. Together they walked across the lot toward his car, her little feet making soft taps on the concrete, her fingers still clutching the worn teddy bear while the oversized coat trailed almost to the ground, and as Adrian opened the car door and guided her gently inside, he caught sight of her reflection in the window. The hollow cheeks, the uncertain eyes, the way she bit her lip as if bracing for scolding, and he silently vowed that whatever story lay behind this night, he would not let her spend another in fear and hunger. Sliding behind the wheel, he started the engine and drove toward the nearest diner still open at the late hour, stealing brief glances at the small figure beside him, noticing how she sat very still, her gaze fixed on her folded hands as though afraid to take up space, and he felt an unfamiliar sting in his chest again, the stirrings of a compassion he had long buried beneath his work. The city lights blurred past outside, while inside the car, a profound silence hung between them, the kind that carries both the weight of sorrow and the fragile hope of a new beginning. The diner's neon sign buzzed faintly in the chilly night air as Adrian slowed his car to a stop beside the quiet roadside cafe, its windows glowing with a soft yellow warmth that spilled out onto the dark sidewalk like a promise of safety. He glanced at the little girl curled up in the passenger seat beneath his heavy coat, noticing the way her head tilted slightly against the window as though exhaustion was finally winning over fear. And for an instant he felt an unexpected tenderness tug at his heart, the kind he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. Stepping out, he moved quickly around the car and opened her door with a careful, almost protective gesture, offering his hand without a word. And when her small fingers slipped hesitantly into his palm, he felt again that thin, cold fragility that made his throat tighten. The bell over the diner door jingled softly as they entered, releasing a faint aroma of coffee, warm bread, and late-night fried food, and the girl's eyes widened slightly at the sight of the cozy booths lined with red vinyl and the chalkboard menu scrawled with simple comfort dishes. The night waitress, a kindly older woman in a faded apron, looked up in surprise at the pair but said nothing when she saw the child's bare feet and tired eyes, merely nodding them toward a booth near the window where the soft glow of the overhead lamp pooled like a circle of gentle light. Adrian helped the girl slide into the booth, then shrugged off his own jacket and signaled for the menu, his voice unusually quiet as he asked the waitress for a bowl of hot chicken soup, fresh bread rolls, and a glass of warm milk, watching out of the corner of his eye as the girl traced the seam of the vinyl seat with one finger, her teddy bear still cradled in her lap as though afraid it might be taken from her. When the food arrived, steaming and fragrant, the girl sat very still for a moment, as if unsure whether it was truly meant for her, and Adrian had to give a small encouraging nod before she picked up the spoon with both hands, her fingers trembling slightly as she dipped it into the broth. She began to eat with a mixture of hunger and careful restraint, taking small polite sips even though he could see the way her eyes followed every movement of the spoon, as if the smell alone was both overwhelming and comforting. Adrian found himself strangely transfixed by the scene, by the delicate way she blew on each spoonful before tasting it, by the little dimple that appeared in her left cheek whenever she swallowed with satisfaction, by the soft hum of relief that escaped her each time she tore a piece of bread and dipped it into the soup. And then a flicker of recognition passed through him so swift and disorienting that it almost made him look away. He had seen that dimple before, years ago, on the smile of a man he had once loved more than his own ambitions, Sophia Bennett, the woman he had let slip away under the crushing pressure of his parents' demands, and for a brief heartbeat the din of the diner seemed to fade as the memory of Sophia's laugh, the way she used to tilt her head while listening, flashed across his mind. He caught himself staring and shook the thought off quickly, blaming fatigue and misplaced pity for making his heart draw connections that surely couldn't be real, forcing his expression back into calm neutrality as he rested his elbows on the table, pretending to check his phone while secretly watching the girl's small shoulders relax for the first time that night as the warmth of food and the quiet hum of the diner settled around her like a fragile sense of safety. When the bowl was finally empty, the girl set down her spoon with an almost shy care, as if afraid to make a noise, then looked up at him with wide brown eyes that no longer seemed quite so frightened, and in that gaze he saw not only gratitude but a tentative hope, something so pure it stirred an ache deep inside his chest. Leaning forward, his voice soft enough to be heard only by her over the low murmur of the late-night customers, Adrian said, "You know, I don't have a daughter. Not in all these years," pausing just long enough to let the weight of his words hang between them, before adding with a hint of gentleness that surprised even himself, "Would you like to be my little girl?" For a second the girl simply stared at him, her lashes trembling as though she wasn't sure she had heard right. Then her lower lip quivered, and her eyes began to glisten, and with a small nod she whispered, her voice thin and shaking, yet carrying a spark of something new, "I'd love that." A faint but unmistakable smile broke across her face. Not the nervous, fleeting smile of a frightened child, but the hesitant, dawning smile of someone who has been offered a sliver of belonging. And Adrian felt an unfamiliar warmth spread through his chest, one that no business triumph had ever given him, a warmth that told him that, without even realizing it, his life had already begun to change. The first rays of dawn broke over the city skyline as Adrian's sleek black car glided silently into the underground parking of his towering glass penthouse. Lily, still wrapped in his oversized coat, dozed lightly in the back seat, clutching her threadbare teddy bear as if afraid it might slip away, while Adrian glanced at her in the rearview mirror, an unfamiliar tenderness stirring in his chest. He had faced boardrooms, hostile investors, and corporate battles without blinking, but the sight of this fragile little girl made his hands tighten on the steering wheel, as if she were the most delicate thing in the world. When they stepped out, the doorman's polite greeting faltered, his eyes widening at the sight of Adrian carrying a sleeping child in his arms, her bare feet dangling, her head resting trustingly on his shoulder, as if she had always belonged there. In the elevator's mirrored walls, Adrian caught his own reflection, a powerful billionaire with a small child leaning against him, and for a moment he barely recognized himself, because for years he had lived alone behind cold steel walls of success, shutting his heart to everything soft or vulnerable. The doors opened to the top floor where the vast, elegant penthouse waited, floor-to-ceiling windows catching the morning light, polished marble floors gleaming under crystal chandeliers, yet the space felt oddly empty, until Lily stirred and blinked up at the breathtaking view with sleepy awe. At that moment, Michael Hayes stepped out from the guest room in his casual shirt, yawning as he poured himself coffee, but nearly spilled the cup when his eyes fell on the unexpected sight of his usually aloof friend cradling a little girl, his brow furrowing as he asked in genuine disbelief, "You, bringing home a child?" A question that hung in the air as Adrian gently lowered Lily onto the plush sofa and, keeping his voice even but firm, replied, "She's been through enough, Michael. I couldn't leave her out there. I can't let her. Go back to that place." Michael set his mug down, his usual teasing demeanor giving way to quiet curiosity as he studied the girl who now sat upright, wide-eyed and shy, trying to hide her bare toes beneath the folds of the coat that dwarfed her. Adrian ordered fresh clothes and a proper breakfast through his assistant, then immediately called a trusted pediatrician who promised to arrive within the hour, his tone brisk, but his gaze softening every time he looked at the child. Lily's eyes wandered across the spacious living room, drawn to the tall bookshelves lined with neatly arranged volumes, the sleek grand piano in one corner, and the family photos on the console table that showed Adrian's late parents but no wife or child. She hugged her teddy bear tighter as if trying to fill the empty space inside her tiny heart. When the delivery arrived, Adrian personally carried the small shopping bags to her, laying out a soft lilac sweater, clean leggings, and a pair of fuzzy slippers that made her gasp softly as if she had been handed a treasure. He guided her toward the guest bedroom that overlooked the sunrise-lit skyline, and as she perched hesitantly on the edge of the huge bed with its snow-white sheets, he crouched down to her level, brushing a stray curl from her forehead, and telling her gently that she was safe here, that no one would shout at her for being hungry. The doctor soon came and performed a thorough checkup while Adrian watched silently from the doorway, his jaw tight with restrained anger as he noticed the faint bruises on her thin arms, anger not at the girl, but at the world, and at the man who had failed her so badly. After the doctor left, assuring them she only needed rest and good food, Adrian helped Lily change into her new clothes, guiding her small hands as she fumbled with the buttons, and when he tucked her beneath the soft duvet, she hesitated, before whispering in a voice barely louder than a breath, "Thank you. You're the nicest man I ever met." A simple sentence that somehow struck deeper than any compliment he had ever received in his high-powered career. Adrian's lips curved into a faint smile, the kind that felt like a long-forgotten memory returning, and he sat on the edge of the bed for a while, listening to the steady rhythm of her breathing as her eyelids fluttered closed in trust, and in that quiet moment he felt the heavy wall he had built around his heart for years start to crumble, piece by piece, as if her innocence had found the cracks and slipped through. Later, as dusk settled and the penthouse glowed in the warmth of soft golden lamps, Michael leaned against the balcony railing beside Adrian, the city lights glittering below them, and said quietly, "I've known you for years, Adrian, and I've seen you shut out the world, but I've never seen you look at anyone the way you looked at her, like you're seeing something you thought you'd lost," his tone thoughtful rather than teasing. Adrian stayed silent, staring at the horizon where the sky met the shimmering skyline, his thoughts drifting to the past he had locked away, the marriage he had let go under his parents' pressure, the woman he had loved but lost. Michael let the silence stretch before speaking again, his voice lower, edged with something like realization. "Adrian, you know who she looks like, right? Like Sophia, your ex-wife." And the words landed like a quiet thunderclap in the night, freezing Adrian's breath mid-air as his mind, against his will, replayed the image of the little girl's dimpled smile and the gentle tilt of her head. So achingly familiar it made his heart pound with an unease he couldn't yet name. Adrian stood completely still at Michael's quiet but heavy words, the late-night glow from the city beyond the penthouse seal. Indow's painting sharp edges across his face as his friend's remark echoed inside him like a bell tolling from some far-off past, stirring memories he had spent years trying to bury, and as the silence stretched, Michael's searching gaze pressed against him as if urging him to admit the unspoken truth, but Adrian turned away, staring at the skyline, feeling the weight of old wounds pressing on his chest, and in that moment the years rolled back to the day he had first met Sophia Bennett, the laughter in her eyes, the strength in her voice, the way she had believed in him before the world called him a millionaire, and then further back to the moment his parents had sat him down in their grand dining room, voices cold and stern, demanding that he let her go because they thought she was not of their world, that she would taint the Carter name. He had tried to argue, to fight, but he had been young and torn between love and filial duty, and in the end, he had signed the divorce papers with hands that shook while Sophia walked away with silent tears, carrying with her the very heart he had not been brave enough to hold on to. And even now as the memory surfaced, he felt the same hollow ache in his chest. Later that night, when the penthouse had grown quiet again and the only sound was the soft hum of the city below, Adrian stepped softly into the guest room where the little girl lay curled beneath the fresh blankets he had arranged for her, her small fingers resting near her cheek, the teddy bear tucked under her chin as if it were the last fragment of safety she had in the world. And he found himself standing there for a long time, watching the gentle rise and fall of her breathing, wondering how a child so small could carry so much sorrow, wondering why there was something hauntingly familiar about the shape of her face and the slight dimple that appeared even in sleep as though she might be dreaming of something kinder than the life she had known. Leaning against the doorframe, Adrian felt the years of bitterness he had layered around his heart begin to crumble, replaced by a yearning he had not allowed himself to feel in a very long time, and in a whisper meant for no one but the night he murmured, "If I'd fought harder, would things have been different?" The words slipped into the shadows like a confession, and he stood there until his eyes drifted to the edge of the blanket where a thin silver bracelet caught the glint of the bedside lamp, so ordinary yet strangely captivating, and he stepped closer, kneeling to see it better, his breath catching as he noticed the tiny engraved letters on the small charm, LGC. And for a heartbeat he froze, staring at the letters as though they were a message from the past, reaching out to him across the years, the initials pulling at a half-formed memory he could not quite grasp, but that sent a shiver through him nonetheless. And as the child stirred slightly, hugging the bear a little tighter, Adrian backed away quietly, retreating into the hallway with a storm of questions gathering behind his calm exterior, knowing that sleep would not come easily with those 3 engraved letters burning in his thoughts like a faint but persistent flame that refused to be ignored. Adrian's chest tightened with a mixture of anger, disbelief, and something deeper he couldn't yet name as he drove through the early morning streets, the city still mostly asleep, headlights cutting through the soft haze of dawn, his mind replaying the letters on the little girl's bracelet over and over. LGC. Each turn of the wheel pulling him closer to the address she had whispered in her sleep, and with every block he passed, the anticipation gnawed at him, a strange combination of dread and urgency pushing him forward. He parked discreetly a few doors down from a modest, slightly run-down apartment building, the kind of place that seemed ordinary from the outside, but as he stepped onto the cracked sidewalk, smelled faintly, of fried food, laundry detergent, and the undercurrent of long-forgotten arguments, and he felt a knot tighten in his stomach, the weight of responsibility pressing on him heavier than any boardroom negotiation ever had. Adrian took a deep breath, adjusting his suit jacket though it felt trivial compared to the storm inside him, then approached the front door and knocked firmly, the sound echoing against the narrow hallway. And when the door swung open, he was confronted by Ethan Blake, a man whose smug expression and careless stance made Adrian's pulse spike with both fury and disbelief, the man's eyes narrowing slightly as if daring him to speak first. Ethan's voice came out thick with entitlement and cruelty, the words dripping like venom. "That brat eats my food like some stray. She's not even mine. Her mom's gone for work most nights. She should be grateful I let her stay at all." And Adrian's hands curled into fists at his sides, the urge to strike him almost overwhelming, a flash of violent justice burning in his chest. Yet he knew that losing control here could only worsen the girl's suffering. He steadied himself, forcing calm into his voice even as it carried the sharp edge of command. "You'll never lay a hand on her again. I'll take care of her from now on." And the defiance in his tone startled Ethan just enough for him to falter, though his expression quickly hardened into one of disdain and arrogance, unwilling to acknowledge any authority that threatened his fragile sense of power. Adrian's gaze softened for a fraction of a second as he looked past Ethan into the dim apartment, imagining the girl curled up on a thin mattress, silently enduring hunger and humiliation, and the image was enough to ignite a protective fury that had no patience for excuses or justifications, only a need to rescue, to claim the safety and warmth that she deserved. Ethan opened his mouth to argue, but Adrian turned on his heel, moving toward the door, each step measured, yet his thoughts whirled like a storm, questions of how someone could be so cruel to a child, why fate had placed him in this position, and the painful realization that the girl's suffering had been inflicted so close to the life he had once been part of. Just as he reached the car, a voice called out from the doorway, hesitant but firm, "Wait!" And Adrian froze mid-step, turning to see Clara Evans, the neighbor who had often watched the family quietly from across the hall, a mixture of caution and urgency in her eyes, stepping lightly onto the sidewalk, her hand holding the doorframe as though anchoring herself to courage, and her words landed like a quiet explosion in his chest. You look just like her real father." And suddenly the morning air felt heavier, charged with the electric pulse of revelation, leaving Adrian's mind racing with memories he had long tried to suppress, with every street corner he had driven past, every sleepless night, and every decision he had made that kept him apart from the life he never knew he had left behind. The world seemed to slow around him, the distant hum of a passing car, the rustle of leaves in the light breeze, the faint clatter of a garbage can lid, and all he could see was the small silver bracelet in his mind, the dimple in the girl's smile, and now Clara's words echoing as though confirming a truth he had been afraid to acknowledge, a truth that promised to change everything in a single heartbeat, leaving his chest tight, his hands trembling slightly, and the certainty that the next steps he took would decide not only her future, but the redemption of a past that had haunted him for years. Adrian felt the words hang in the cool morning air like a sudden thunderclap, the faint scent of the city mixing with the faint warmth of the rising sun as Clara Evans's voice poured out the story he had never expected to hear, each syllable striking him harder than any business defeat or personal failure he had endured in his 30 years. He sank slowly onto the low stone wall across the street, the harsh lines of his tailored suit a stark contrast to the fragile revelation unfolding in front of him, his hands gripping his knees as Clara explained, her tone gentle yet urgent, that Sophia had raised the little girl entirely alone after their divorce, that she had endured countless nights of hardship without complaint, that she had sacrificed everything to give the child a life that was safe and loving even in the absence of her father, and Adrian felt the weight of decades of absence press down on him in one suffocating wave. Clara's voice quivered slightly as she continued, explaining how Sophia had remained single, her heart quietly bearing the pain of losing him and the child he had never known, until the crushing pressures of poverty and circumstance had driven her into a recent marriage with Ethan Blake, a man with neither compassion nor patience, someone whose presence had subjected the girl to nights of fear, hunger, and humiliation that Adrian could barely comprehend without trembling himself. The realization hit Adrian like a physical blow as he repeated her words silently in his mind, the syllables twisting into a cruel, impossible truth. Lily Grace Carter. His own last name, his blood running through veins he had never known, a daughter whose very existence had been a secret forced upon him by time, pride and circumstance. His throat tightened, his chest rising and falling in uneven gasps as images from the past flooded back. Sophia's laughter, the gentle tilt of her head when she smiled, the moments he had overlooked, the arguments he had lost to stubbornness, the cold nights of corporate triumphs that had never brought him the warmth of a family, and suddenly he realized that the little girl he had rescued was the living, breathing embodiment of everything he had once forsaken, the personification of a love he had abandoned and a consequence he had ignored for too long. The air around him seemed to thrum with anticipation, the city noise fading into an almost sacred hush as Clara stepped closer, her eyes reflecting both sympathy and urgency, urging him to accept the truth he had been running from for years, explaining the bracelet with the initials LGC. The silver charm now fully explained, each tiny curve of the engraving a whisper of the connection he had denied himself, and Adrian's hands clenched, the polished leather of his briefcase pressing against his palms as a strange mixture of guilt, awe and disbelief coursed through him. He stood, pacing in small circles, the ground beneath his shoes echoing softly, feeling the impossible weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders, a responsibility that could no longer be postponed, no longer ignored, a duty to protect, to love, to reclaim what had been denied, and his eyes drifted upward toward the night sky still fading to early morning hues, where the first rays of sun pierced the clouds, illuminating the buildings, the streets, the small alleys where Lily had suffered in silence, and he whispered into the cold, vast expanse above, almost afraid to hear his own voice. "She's my daughter?" The words escaped as a fragile breath, carrying with them every unspoken regret, every lost opportunity, every moment he had failed to fight for Sophia and the child they had created together, and in that instant, the city seemed to hold its breath with him, the wind pausing, the distant horns of traffic muted, as if even the universe was waiting for the answer that he did not yet know how to articulate, the answer that would change the course of all their lives forever, and in his chest, the hollow ache of absence collided with a sudden, trembling surge of hope, the kind of hope that comes when the past finally catches up to the present, demanding acknowledgement, reconciliation, and action, leaving Adrian frozen, eyes fixed on the horizon, heart pounding, knowing that the next step he took would bridge the gap between decades of loss and the chance to finally become the father he had been too blind to be before. And in that suspended moment, with the soft glow of dawn wrapping the city, in tentative warmth, every fear, every memory, every regret and every heartbeat converged in a single question, whispered so softly only he could hear it. "She's my daughter?" Adrian's heart raced as he drove through the streets toward Sophia's apartment, the city still shrouded in the soft golden haze of early morning, every traffic light, every corner, every familiar building seeming to pulse with the weight of what was about to unfold, and as he stepped out of the car with Lily clinging to his hand, her small fingers entwined with his, he felt a mixture of anticipation, fear, and a love so fierce it threatened to overwhelm him entirely. The hallway smelled faintly of laundry soap and morning breakfast, but beneath it lingered the subtle tension of suppressed arguments and long-forgotten pain, and when the door swung open, Sophia stood there, her expression frozen first in surprise, then shifting rapidly to horror as her eyes fell on the little girl she had worked so hard to protect from the cruelty of Ethan, the faint tremor in her hands betraying the panic and dread she had carried all night. Lily immediately hid behind Adrian's leg, her tiny head peeking out just enough to reveal wide brown eyes brimming with both fear and curiosity, and she whispered softly, almost reverently, "Mommy, this man saved me," her voice barely audible, yet carrying a weight that cut through the years of silence and absence like a knife through silk. Sophia's gaze, fixed on Adrian, shifted slowly from confusion to disbelief, then to a flood of emotions so raw and complex that it made her breath catch. The shock, the old love, the regret of years spent apart, the unspoken longing for what might have been, and finally the cautious hope that perhaps, somehow, this moment could undo a fraction of the pain of the past. Adrian knelt gently before Lily, lowering himself to her level so their eyes met, his voice trembling with a vulnerability he had never allowed anyone to see. "Sweetheart, I'm not just the man who saved you. I'm your real daddy. I should never have left you and your mom. I'm so sorry." And with each word, he felt the walls of time crumble around him, the years of absence, mistakes, and regrets dissolving into the quiet intensity of the present. Lily blinked, her tiny hands lifting hesitantly to touch his face, feeling the warmth of his skin and the subtle tremor of emotion in his features, and in a voice that carried both wonder and hope, she whispered, "You mean, I have a daddy? For real?" Adrian drew her into his arms, holding her with a tenderness that spoke louder than any words, tears streaming down his cheeks as he pressed his forehead to hers, inhaling the faint scent of her hair, a mixture of innocence and a lifetime of untold stories, feeling the fullness of love and regret collide in a single, overwhelming moment. Sophia stepped forward, her own tears welling as she watched the reunion, her hands trembling as she reached out, first hesitating, then placing them gently on Adrian's shoulder, a silent acknowledgement of forgiveness and of the bond they had once shared, now reignited in the small miracle that was their daughter, and for a brief, suspended moment, the three of them existed in a bubble outside of time, untouched by the world's judgments, conflicts, or past mistakes. Lily giggled softly, a sound so pure it echoed in Adrian's chest, like music he had forgotten existed, her arms wrapping around his neck as she leaned into him, sensing the safety, love, and protection that had been absent for far too long, and Adrian hugged her tighter, whispering over and over, "I promise, I'll never leave you again, ever." While Sophia's eyes met his once more, a silent, unspoken conversation flowing between them that carried the wheeze of years lost, the recognition of enduring love, and the hope of a future rebuilt on trust, compassion, and shared responsibility. Outside the apartment, the city continued its ceaseless rhythm, unaware that within these walls, a family once broken had begun to heal, the laughter of a child filling spaces long hollow, the gentle sobs of adults washing away old regrets, and the warmth of human connection bridging the gap between past mistakes and present redemption. Adrian held Lily for a long time, rocking her gently, feeling her small heart beat against his, and in that embrace, the years of absence, pain, and sorrow transformed into a quiet triumph, a testament to the power of love, forgiveness, and the unbreakable bond between a father and his child, while Sophia stayed close, her hand resting on his arm, a steady, reassuring presence, and together, they allowed themselves to finally breathe, to finally believe, to finally hope that the past, no matter how cruel, had led them to this singular, miraculous moment of reunion, closure, and the promise of all the mornings yet to come. The sunlight streamed gently through the apartment windows as Adrian held Lily close, the warmth of her small body pressed against his chest filling him with a sense of purpose and responsibility he had never truly known before, while Sophia watched them, her eyes glistening with unshed tears, the years of struggle and heartache melting into a fragile but steadfast hope that the family she had longed for could finally exist in full. With a resolute heart, Adrian called Ethan Blake, the man who had caused so much suffering, and when the stepfather appeared, arrogant and unconcerned, Adrian's calm voice cut through the tension like steel, leaving no room for argument or cruelty, stating firmly that Ethan would never again have access to Lily, that his threats, neglect, and abuse were over, and that the law and Adrian's resolve would ensure the child's safety permanently, while Ethan's smugness faltered into unease, realizing at last that his control had been broken, and that the bond between father and daughter was far stronger than his intimidation. In the weeks that followed, Adrian devoted himself entirely to rebuilding Lily's life, each morning bringing new routines filled with laughter, lessons, and tender moments, as Sophia and he worked together to ensure that every corner of her world was imbued with love, warmth, and the nurturing care that she had so desperately needed, enrolling her in a school with kind teachers, helping her pick out books, arranging activities to foster her curiosity, and staying up late at night reading stories together until her eyelids grew heavy, while Adrian would whisper softly into her ear, "You are safe. You are loved, you are mine." And in those words, Lily began to understand the depth of the love she had been missing all her life. They decorated her room with bright colors, soft blankets, and shelves of toys and stuffed animals, ensuring that no corner held shadows of fear, and every morning, the aroma of breakfast greeted her, a symbol of stability and care, while Adrian and Sophia, side by side, navigated parenthood with newfound understanding and patience, their shared laughter echoing through the apartment like music, filling spaces that had been hollow for years, and slowly, the house transformed from a place of past pain to a sanctuary of hope and joy, with small rituals that reinforced their unity, like evening walks, bedtime stories, and shared meals where smiles replaced sorrow. One afternoon they took Lily to the park, a sprawling green space where the sun danced on the leaves and children's laughter rang in the air, and as she ran ahead, skipping along the path with her little hands outstretched, Adrian felt a swell of emotion so profound it nearly took his breath, seeing her unburdened by the past, free to be a child in a world finally safe and full of love. He sat on a worn wooden bench, holding her in his lap as she giggled and wriggled, the sheer joy radiating from her like sunlight, while Sophia, kneeling slightly behind them, snapped a picture on her phone, capturing not just the moment, but the transformation of years of struggle into a single frame of happiness, a visual testament to resilience, forgiveness, and the unbreakable bond of family. Lily looked up at Adrian with wide, trusting eyes, her small hands resting on his shoulders, and asked in a voice filled with innocent curiosity, "Daddy, will you ever leave us again?" And in that instant, every regret, every sleepless night, every tear shed in solitude over what might have been, coalesced into a single, absolute truth that settled firmly in his heart, and Adrian's voice, steady yet thick with emotion, replied, "Never, not again. I've found what matters most." And he hugged her tightly, feeling her heartbeat match his own, as Sophia joined them, her arms circling both father and daughter in a warm embrace. And in that embrace, the past's shadows finally dissolved, replaced by a light that would never fade, the laughter of a child, the tears of healing, and the promise of a life reborn as a family, whole and unshakable, a living testament to the power of love, humanity, and second chances, leaving the park bathed in golden sunlight as they walked together toward an endless horizon of hope, their hearts entwined, their bonds cemented, and their lives forever changed in the most profound, beautiful way imaginable.